You meet someone new, and the chemistry is instant. There is something in the way they hold back just slightly, something in the pause before they answer, that feels like recognition. Not the comfortable kind, the electric kind. The kind that makes your chest tighten and your mind whisper, "This one is different." 3 months later, you are standing in your kitchen, having the same argument you swore you left behind. The same silence settling over the room like dust. The same slow disappointment pooling in your stomach, and you cannot understand how you got here again, because this is a completely different person. Except it isn't. Not really. Not where it counts. There was a woman who only ever fell for older men. Stately, composed, emotionally distant, men who carried authority like a coat they never took off. Her father had been exactly this way, remote, impressive, unreachable. She married one such man at 24, a widower more than 20 years her senior, and she respected him enormously. When he died, she held his memory for nearly 2 decades. And then, when loneliness finally broke through, she married a stranger. A man already twice divorced for cruelty, because something in him still fit the shape of that original absence. She knew who he was before she chose him. She chose him anyway. Not because she was foolish, because something enormous and hidden was running beneath her awareness. The part of her that had already chosen this man before her conscious mind had a say. That is the unconscious at work, and it does not consult you. It moves first. What kept pulling her back was a knot of old feeling that tightens every time you meet someone who resembles the one who first tied it. It does not just remember the wound. It stages the whole scene again before you can stop it. The casting call goes out and you do not even know you are auditioning people for a role that was written decades ago. And when that knot pulls tight enough, it drags you somewhere older. That is regression. The way love can haul you backward into a smaller, needier version of yourself. Someone still waiting at a parent's door for a warmth that never quite arrived. The energy that pulls you towards someone does not flow forward into new life. It spills backward into ancient channels, filling up the riverbeds of childhood. So the question is not why you keep choosing them. The question is who wrote the part they are playing, and whether you have ever actually seen the script. The script was written before you could read. Before you had words for longing or disappointment or love. It was written in the body, in the nervous system, in the way a particular tone of voice made you feel safe or made you brace. The parent, the first other, the first face that meant everything, did not just raise you. They authored the invisible instructions your whole inner life would follow when it came time to reach for someone in the dark. Think about what a child actually experiences. The world arrives enormous and undifferentiated, and the child has no way to separate what comes from inside, its own instincts, its own hunger, its own terror, from what comes from the parent. The two blur together. The mother's warmth becomes the definition of warmth itself. The father's distance becomes the architecture of what desire is supposed to feel like. And because the child's awareness is so small, so flooded, everything that shapes it seems to pour in from the outside, even the parts that were already wired in. The child cannot tell the difference between its own nature and the will of the people standing over the crib. So the template that forms is not just a memory of the parent. It is a fusion, the parent's real behavior tangled up with something far older, something that was already waiting in the child's mind before the parent ever appeared. That something older is what we can call an archetype. A groove worn into the human mind long before you were born. A pattern so old it shows up in every culture's love stories, every fairy tale about the prince and the maiden, every myth about a child searching for a lost parent. The archetype is not a memory. It is a readiness, a shape the mind already holds, the way a riverbed exists before the rain. And when the first real person arrives, the mother, the father, they fill that shape, they pour into it. And the image that forms is not a photograph of who that parent actually was. It is something grander, something stranger. The real parent gets swallowed by the mythic one. The child does not see a tired woman making breakfast. The child sees the source of all nourishment, the origin of the world. And that enormous inner portrait, not who the parent truly is, but who the deep memory insists they must be, is what gets carried forward into every adult relationship. humming beneath the surface like a frequency only the body can hear. This is where it gets painful, because that inner portrait does not update. The real parent eventually comes into focus. Flawed, limited, sometimes disappointing, but the original image, the mythic one, does not dissolve. It goes underground, it waits, and then, decades later, you meet someone at a dinner party, and before you have finished your first glass of wine, something in your chest says yes. Not because of anything they have actually said or done, because their face has become a screen, and something inside you is projecting onto it. That is projection. The moment your inner world spills onto another person's face. You think you are seeing them, but what you are really seeing is an old photograph superimposed on a living human being. The mythic parent, the one your childhood built out of need and archetype, and 1,000 nights of waiting, is suddenly standing in front of you wearing a stranger's clothes. And this is not a flaw. This is how the whole inner life operates when awareness is dim and longing is bright. The weaker your consciousness in a given moment, the more tired you are, the more lonely, the more desperate to feel something, the more that ancient portrait overrides the real person in front of you. Fantasy overwrites fact. You fall in love not with a human being, but with a composite, part stranger, part parent, part God. The woman who married the cruel widower was not choosing cruelty. She was choosing recognition. The shape of his emotional absence fit the groove that had been carved when she was 4 years old and her father stood in the doorway without entering. That groove is the archetype filled with her specific history, and it selected him the way a lock selects a key. Not because the key is good, but because the teeth match. And here is what makes it so hard to break. The child's attachment to this original pattern is not casual. It was built during a time when attachment meant survival, when the bond with the parent was the bond with life itself. So the whole inner life clings to it with a ferocity that looks from the outside like self-destruction, but feels from the inside like coming home. To let go of the pattern would feel like severing something umbilical, something woven into the root structure of who you are. Every culture has understood this. Every mythology contains a moment where the child must be cut free, a sacrifice, a departure, a wound that separates the new life from the old. The question is what that severing actually costs, and why so many people would rather keep bleeding than pick up the knife. It costs everything you have built your identity around. That is the honest answer. Because the pattern is not a habit you picked up somewhere along the way, like biting your nails or reaching for your phone when you are anxious. It is structural. It is load-bearing. Pull it out and you do not know what holds you up anymore. This is where regression does its real work, not as a dramatic collapse, not as some cinematic breakdown, but as a quiet undertow that drags you backward every time life asks you to grow. Someone offers you a love that is calm and available, and instead of stepping toward it, something in you recoils. Not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. The whole of your inner life has been organized around a specific shape of longing, and when that shape is not present, love does not register. It is like listening for a melody in the wrong key. The notes are all there, but your ear cannot find the song. So you turn away from the gentle one and walk toward the one who makes your stomach drop, because that drop is the only signal your body trusts. The regression pulls you backward into childhood patterns at the exact moment life is demanding that you move forward. And it is not about sex. Not really. The old idea that children carry a literal desire for the parent misses the deeper architecture. What the child carries forward is an emotional blueprint, a template for how closeness is supposed to feel, what distance means, what you have to earn and what you will never be given. A girl whose father was brilliant and withholding does not grow up wanting her father. She grows up wanting the specific cocktail of admiration and starvation he taught her to associate with love. A boy whose mother was warm but engulfing does not seek his mother. He seeks the particular collision of comfort and suffocation that became his definition of intimacy. The blueprint is not a wish, it is a lens. And everything you see through it looks like fate. There was a man who moved through his entire life inside this kind of invisible architecture. He had lost his mother young, attached himself to an older, sickly woman and cared for her until she died. Then he married his brother's ex-wife, a woman 17 years his senior, not out of passion, but out of a gravity he could not name. When the child they raised together was killed in an accident, something cracked open, and for the first time he fell in love with a young woman, and the whole of his inner life split apart. The suggestion that he leave his aging wife was unthinkable to him, not because the marriage was good, because suffering inside the old pattern felt more real than any joy outside it. His childhood had taught him that love looked like sacrifice, that closeness meant tending to someone's pain, and he could not metabolize a version of love that did not taste like that. The fantasy world of his early years had never actually dissolved. It had simply gone underground, and now, under pressure, it broke through the surface and flooded everything. This is what a constellation looks like. The moment a buried pattern lights up. Something in the room, a tone of voice, a gesture, and suddenly you are not reacting to what is in front of you, but to something that happened decades ago. The old wound activates, and the present moment becomes a stage set dressed to look like your childhood kitchen. You argue with your partner about dishes and hear your father's voice coming out of your own mouth. You feel abandoned by a 2-hour silence, and your body responds as though you have been left in a room for days. The trigger is small. The detonation is enormous. Because what has been triggered is not a thought. It is a whole constellation of feeling, memory, and bodily response that existed before language and does not obey it now. And when the constellation is bright enough, something fractures. That fracture is dissociation. Part of you splits away and starts running the show from backstage. You are present in body but absent in the way that matters. You watch yourself say things you do not mean. You feel your face arrange itself into an expression that belongs to someone younger, someone smaller, someone still trying to earn a love that was never on offer. The adult you have built disappears, and in their place stands the child blinking in the floodlights, performing a scene they have rehearsed 10,000 times without ever choosing to. Every culture on earth has built rituals to sever this thread. Initiation rites that pull the adolescent away from the mother's body and into the adult world. Ceremonies that wound deliberately so the old skin can be shed. The pattern is not personal weakness. It is a universal developmental threshold, and the rituals exist because every society has understood that without intervention, without some blade that cuts between the child and the mythic parent, the child never leaves. They just grow taller. But knowing you are caught inside the pattern is not the same as stepping out of it, because stepping out requires something more specific than insight. It requires learning to see the difference between the living person standing in front of you and the ancient portrait you have stapled to their face. So you learn to see the difference. But what does that look like on a Tuesday night, standing in the kitchen, mid-argument about who forgot to pay the electric bill? Here is what it looks like. You are 6 months into a relationship. Things have been good, easy even. Then one evening your partner says something small. Maybe they glance at their phone while you are talking. Maybe they forget to ask about the thing you mentioned that morning, the thing that mattered. And something rises in you that is far too large for the moment. You are not irritated. You are devastated. You are 8 years old again, talking to someone who is not listening, and the rage that floods your chest has nothing to do with a phone screen. This is transference, the recycling of an old relationship onto a new person. You are not talking to your partner about attention. You are talking to your mother about why she always seemed to be somewhere else. And until you catch it happening, you will keep punishing someone for a debt they did not incur. The part of you that signed up for this relationship, the part that picks the restaurant, swipes right, decides this one feels promising, that part believes it is making free choices. Call it the ego. It builds a convincing case. It says, I chose this person because they are kind, because they are funny, because they fit. But the real selection happened long before you sat down at the table. It happened in a room you do not remember entering, where an old image was being projected like a film onto every new face that walked through the door. The ghost portrait of someone long gone, still hanging in the gallery of your expectations. A parent, a first love, an absence that took on a shape that portrait chose for you. The ego just signed the paperwork. And then there is the face you showed up with, the persona, the self you polished for dating profiles and first dinners, the curated version you hope will be loved, which has almost nothing to do with who you are when the lights go off. Everyone constructs one. It is not dishonesty, it is survival. But here is the trap. If someone falls in love with the face you built for public viewing, you will spend the rest of the relationship terrified that the real version, the one who is petty sometimes, who needs too much, who goes quiet for reasons they cannot explain, will be discovered and rejected. You end up guarding a door that leads to everything genuine about you. Behind that door is the collection of everything you pushed into a locked room. The selfishness, the hunger, the rage, the tenderness you decided was too risky to show. Call it the shadow. And here is the strange part. Every partner you choose somehow holds the key to that room. You pick someone who will eventually, by accident or by instinct, push against the exact qualities you have hidden. The person who triggers your worst reactions is often the person standing closest to the truth you have been avoiding. Recognizing all of this, the transference, the old portrait, the curated face, the locked room, is the first act of withdrawal. You begin to pull the projection back. And what follows is not relief, it is grief. Because the moment you stop seeing the ghost portrait on your partner's face, you lose something. You lose the fantasy that this person will finally complete the story your childhood left unfinished. You lose the intoxication of that state where you are so emotionally fused with someone that you cannot tell where your feelings end and theirs begin. That fusion felt like love. It was not love, it was recognition. The whole of your inner life reaching for something it already knew. What remains, after the projection is withdrawn, is harder and less romantic. You see a person, not the hidden feminine shape living inside your expectations of love, not the hidden masculine shape you have been searching every room for. A person, with their own locked rooms, their own curated faces, their own ancient portraits they are slowly learning to take down. A relationship built on that seeing is quieter. It does not sweep you off your feet. It asks you to stand on them. And standing there, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time, you face a question that no amount of insight can answer for you. Only a choice can. Whether to stay in the bright, unforgiving room where two real people are visible to each other, or to walk back through the old door, where the lighting is softer and the faces are familiar and nothing ever has to change. Most people walk back through the old door, not because they are weak, but because the body remembers what the mind has not yet learned to name. The familiar ache has a gravitational pull to it. It feels like home, even when home was never safe. And there is no shame in that. The unconscious does not choose pain out of stupidity. It chooses recognition. It moves toward what it already knows how to survive. But here is what changes, slowly, for anyone willing to stay in that bright room a little longer than feels comfortable. You begin to notice the pattern not after it has played out, not 6 months into the relationship when the same silence descends, the same withdrawal, the same quiet rage dressed up as indifference, but in the moment of choosing. You feel the old pull. You recognize the inherited portrait of a love that was never really yours, and instead of mistaking it for destiny, you see it for what it is, a script you were handed before you had language. Mature love is not the absence of that script. Nobody burns it clean. The complex doesn't vanish because you've named it. The shadow doesn't dissolve because you've seen it once in good light. What changes is smaller than that and more radical. You catch yourself mid-reach. You feel the deep current that moves you toward another person, and you pause long enough to ask whether you are reaching for a real human being or for the ghost of something unfinished. That pause is everything. It is the difference between repetition and relationship, between regression and the slow, honest work of becoming who you actually are. And the partnership that grows from that pause will not feel like the love songs promised. It will feel strange at first, almost too quiet, because nobody is performing and nobody is rescuing and nobody is disappearing on cue. Two people, standing in ordinary light, visible and imperfect, and choosing each other anyway. Not because the fit is seamless, but because the willingness is real. There is no door that closes behind you forever. That is the truth no one tells you. The old room is always there. The soft lighting, the familiar faces, the promise that nothing has to change. You will stand in the hallway between those two rooms more times than you can count. The only question worth asking is which door you reach for tomorrow morning, and whether you can stay curious about why.